Should big tech have shut down Parler? Let's look at this from the perspective of the app creator. So first off, this is not intended to be a political post. I don't know if there's any way it cannot be a political post, but I'll do my best to look at this issue from all sides, from the left and from the right, and also from all of the different parties involved. So that means we've got the Parler user, we've got Parler themselves as the app creator, and then also the tech providers and channels through which Parler is distributed. So I'm talking about Amazon Web Services, as well as Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. So let's consider this from everybody's point of view. So anybody who has launched an app into the App Store or to Google Play can tell you that they have to agree to a whole bunch of terms of service, policies, basically rules by which you must abide if you're going to have an app published through a channel such as the App Store or Google Play. And those policies are pretty thorough. I mean, they're worded in a way that's accessible so you can understand what we're talking about. It's not like it's really crazy legalese that's really hard to understand. I mean, it's written in pretty clear language. And so as the app creator, you need to comply with these policies. And what I wanted to do is just share a couple of these policies in terms of service from both Apple and Google so you can kind of see what we're talking about. Now, keep in mind, these are policies that Parler and anybody else who wants to publish an app to these two channels must abide by. So keep that in mind as I share these policies with you. So Google has policies against violence and terrorism. Taken from their policy documentation. We don't allow apps that depict or facilitate gratuitous violence or other dangerous activities. Apps that depict fictional violence in the context of a game, such as cartoons, hunting, or fishing, are generally allowed. We do not permit terrorist organizations to publish apps on Google Play for any purpose, including recruitment. We don't allow apps with content related to terrorism, such as content that promotes terrorist acts, incites violence, or celebrates terrorist attacks. If posting content related to terrorism for an educational, documentary, scientific, or artistic purpose, be mindful to provide enough information so users understand the context. All right, so that's Google's policy on violence and terrorism. Also, Apple has their own statement here. They prohibit realistic portrayals of people or animals being killed, maimed, tortured, or abused, or content that encourages violence. Enemies within the context of a game cannot solely target a specific race, culture, real government, corporation, or any other real entity. So we've got policies about violence and about terrorism and how these platforms, they don't support these things. And so if you want to be on their platform, you have to agree to abide by this policy. Now, they also have policies about what's called user-generated content. That means that it's not the actual app creator providing content, it's the people that are using it, right? The users are creating this content. So here's an excerpt from Apple's user-generated content policy. Apps with user-generated content present particular challenges ranging from intellectual property infringement to anonymous bullying. To prevent abuse, apps with user-generated content or social networking services must include a method for filtering objectionable material from being posted to the app, a mechanism to report offensive content and timely responses to concerns, the ability to block abusive users from the service, and published contact information so users can easily reach you. So basically they're saying there has to be a way to moderate content that users create on your platform. Google also has a policy about user-generated content, and here is one excerpt. Apps whose primary purpose is featuring objectionable user-generated content will be removed from Google Play. That's a pretty simple statement, pretty clear. If you have user-generated content that violates our policies, we'll take it down. Similarly, apps that end up being used primarily for hosting objectionable user-generated content or that develop a reputation among users of being a place where such content thrives will also be removed from Google Play. Parler is one such app that allows users to generate content. So there is lots of user-generated content on Parler. Okay, so we've established that these platforms, they have policies against violence, against terrorism, and they have strict rules around user-generated content. Why do they have such strict rules around user-generated content? Well, there's lots of questions right now in this country, in the United States, about moderation and the transparency of moderation. And the reason why is because we've got different political viewpoints and different narratives that are being told. On October 28th, 2020, there was a congressional hearing where big tech CEOs got grilled by Congress about the transparency of their their moderation activities, among other things. So the congressional hearing was really about, hey, big tech giants, are you controlling this too much? Are you controlling political conditions? Are you controlling what people can and can't say? And so lawmakers from both sides basically grilled these big tech CEOs, asking them about the transparency of their moderation practices and whether or not they were being fair to their users and also to American citizens. Listen to this excerpt where Senator John Thune of South Dakota asks these CEOs, do they consider themselves to be the referees in political discussions, political discourse in the United States?
Democrat colleagues suggest that when we criticize the bias against conservatives, that we're somehow working the refs. But the analogy of working the refs assumes that it's legitimate even to think of you as refs. It assumes that you three Silicon Valley CEOs get to decide what political speech gets amplified or suppressed, and it assumes that you're the arbiters of truth, or at the very least, the publishers making editorial decisions about speech. So yes or no, I would ask this of each of the three of you, are the Democrats correct that you all are the legitimate referees over our political speech? Mr. Zuckerberg, are you the ref?
Senator, I certainly think not, and I do not want us to have that role.
Mr. Dorsey, are you the ref?
No.
Mr. Pichai, are you the ref?
Senator, I do think we make content moderation decisions, but we are transparent about it, and we do it to protect users. But we really believe and support maximizing freedom of expression.
I'll take that as three no's, and I agree with that. You are not the referees of our political speech. That's why all three of you have to be more transparent and fair with your content moderation policies and your content selection algorithms, because at the moment it is, as I said, largely a black box. There's real mistrust among the American people about whether you're being fair or transparent. And this extends to concerns about the kinds of amplification and suppression decisions your platforms may make on Election Day and during the post-election period if the results of the election are too close to call. And so I just want to underscore again for my Democratic friends who keep using this really bad referee analogy, Google, Facebook, and Twitter are not the referees over our democracy. Now, second question, the PACT Act, which I referenced earlier, includes provisions to give users due process and an explanation when content they post is removed. So this is, again, a yes or no question. Do you agree that users should be entitled to due process and an explanation when content they post has been taken down? Mr. Zuckerberg.
Senator, I think that would be a good principle to have.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey.
Absolutely. We believe in a fair and straightforward appeals process.
Great. Mr. Pichai?
Yes, Senator.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay, so as a backdrop, we've got lawmakers asking big tech giants, are you the decision makers? Are you the referees? Do you get to decide what people say and when they say it? Where's your transparency of your moderation? We can't tell. It seems pretty arbitrary. So how can you say that you're being fair to your users and not swaying the discussion one way or the other? Now, it could be really easy to say, well, from the user's perspective, I want to post what I want to post, so therefore these tech companies are infringing upon my right to free speech. I joined Parler specifically so I could say what I wanted to. That was what Parler told me I could do, and now I can't do that because Parler has been suspended. Well, why was Parler suspended, for example, from the Apple App Store? Is it because Apple wanted to sway the political discussion one way or the other? It really was about moderation. And again, coming from the backdrop of having just been grilled on the transparency of moderation activities, now suddenly the App Store has got this app on their platform that is not moderating content that could incite violence. We're already familiar with the policies. We just read them. So what exactly does Tim Cook, Apple CEO, have to say about the suspension of Parler from the App Store?
Parler has some issues with moderation. There are some incitement to violence examples on there, and they need to step it up on the moderation. And our hope is that they do that and get back on the store.
Oh, so they could get back on the store? They could?
Yes, we suspended them. We did not ban them.
Oh, because the CEO, as you know, he's raising issues about his right to the First Amendment. What do you say about that concern?
We have terms of service for our App Store. And some of those terms of service he's in violation of. All we're asking, Gail, is that he meet the terms of service.
So you can see there's more here going on than just the rights of the user, right? You got the rights of the user to say what they want to say, that's true. But you also have to consider the rights of the app creator, which is Parler. Parler is saying our free speech has been violated because we've been taken down by these service providers. But what we're not really considering is the perspective of these tech giant providers, these solution providers, platforms. Everything that has happened with the attack on the Capitol and Parler's suspension is going to go before Congress. And they're going to have an entire discussion and hearing about this. I can guarantee there's going to be talk about, well, how come none of you tech people saw this attack coming? What about the FBI? Shouldn't they have known exactly what was going on before we had this terrorist attack? Like, generally, we want to promote the general welfare and ensure domestic tranquility. That's what the Constitution was created for. So if we're trying to keep Americans safe, but we're also trying to give everyone free speech, suddenly in this new world of tech and user-generated content, it becomes a very complicated issue. It's not necessarily Google's or Apple's responsibility to moderate content on Parler, because Parler is the one that has access to its own data. Parler is the one that should have policies about moderation of content, etc. Can you imagine the concern in tech leaders' minds going on that, like, hey, we've got this app that's running and potentially serving as a platform for the planning of terrorist activity against the U.S. government. So again, terrorist activity of a domestic enemy. We got to take it down. Because if we don't, what'll happen? We're going to go before Congress again, and they're going to say, what are you doing? You aided and abetted this terrorist activity. How come you allowed Parler to be on your platform and didn't do anything about it? Like, there's not really a winning scenario for channel partners. They have to be very risk averse in major situations like this. Now, you could say, and I have seen this floating around the internet, like, well, we still have lots of like child trafficking or human trafficking or other kinds of illegal activity happening on Gmail or in other channels, and we can only shut down criminal activity as fast as we can discover it and find it. So yes, while a user does have a right to free speech, an app creator also has a responsibility to keep a safe environment for other users, and they're also free to create their own policies for what users can and cannot do within their applications. But also, if you're going to use a cloud solution to support your app, those cloud solution providers, those channel partners also have rights and obligations. And ultimately, they will be held responsible for how their technologies are used. You have to look at these tech providers also as a business, which they are. And then what are the rights of the business? What are the rights of the business owners? What rights and responsibilities does that business have? Now, do you remember in 2018 there was this case that went to the Supreme Court? It was about this baker, Jack Phillips. He ran a bakery and he made wedding cakes. And there was a gay couple that asked him to make a cake for their wedding. And he didn't want to, and so he refused. And so they had a big legal scandal over it. And ultimately the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Jack Phillips's business on grounds of religious freedom, that he couldn't be forced to create a message that went against his religious beliefs. And also, he didn't make cakes for lots of different messages, right? He wouldn't make a cake that would disparage the LGBT community in any way. So looking at the rights of the consumer versus the rights of the business, obviously there's not really a legal precedent that's been set here. And the Supreme Court basically stated, we've resolved this case, but we really don't have a precedent for how to interpret this in the future. But basically, though, the rights of the business owner had to be considered as well as the rights of the consumer. You can't force a business to do certain things against their religious beliefs. If you're going to say, let's look at this from the different perspectives here, right? From the conservative perspective, you cannot force the business to do something against its conscience or against its religious beliefs, and that business has every right to say no to a customer. All right, so if that's the case, then looking from the right perspective, you also have to consider the rights of Amazon, Amazon Web Services. You have to look at the rights of Google and Apple in terms of their rights to not support the incitement of violence. And so if they have to say no to a customer, or for example, as Tim Cook said, to suspend them from their app store, that's within their right to do that. You can't force Apple to carry Parler. You can't force Google to carry Parler in the Google Play Store. So we have to consider the rights of the business as well as the rights of the consumer. Now, from the left perspective, if you're going to go to a business and say, hey, you're discriminating, you have to provide service to these people, then you could easily say, well, what happens in this scenario? You could go to Amazon Web Services and say, you have to provide services to Parler. So is this really something that we want to set as a precedent? Because from the left, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So what might serve one political narrative in one situation might not serve that same political narrative in another situation. So you got to be careful that you are being fair and that you're applying the same fairness and the rule of law in all cases. Now, as an app creator, how do I feel? And if you're an app creator, how should you feel, or what should you take away from this situation? If I were an app creator and I had created an app with user-generated content and I had deployed it and it had scaled and people adopted it, and then I found out that my app had been used to incite a political uprising, a violent political uprising, I would be mortified. And as citizens, you would say, how come we didn't know about this earlier? We should have been able to find out about this beforehand. I'm sure there are lots of non-violent conservative people on Parler that would be terrified to know that it had been used to incite violence, and they would not want that to happen. So free speech has kind of a limit, right? We can only go so far before we have to say, no, you're inciting violence, or that we have to cut that off at some point, because there is such a thing as criminal activity, and we can't have that happening in our apps. If you are going to create an app with user-generated content, you really need to have excellent moderation. And as we can see, that if you don't have that excellent moderation, then you very well may be suspended. Fortunately, Tim Cook has come out and said that they can correct their moderation issues and abide by their policies. So we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on App Creative. Join us again. Videos are published every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 noon Mountain Time.